easier do see this as an opportunity to potentially update some of those to get better responses. To ensure we have the best data, but all of that would be, very separate from, for example, like the preferences that the commission has set for who is selected off of the wait list. We do collect a number of sort of demographic data elements today, and we would continue to do that in the new system.
Okay. In terms of adding all buildings into the system as opposed to just those with the project-based vouchers that are required by HUD to have a separate wait list, help me understand how a person who, say, has been on our wait list to whatever the earliest year is that someone is still on our waiting list from. And for an example, I'm just going to pick 2010, but quite frankly, it's probably earlier than that. If someone has been on our wait list that long and did not and does not indicate any particular preference for housing, for whatever reason, that they don't care, they'll go anywhere, or that they don't know what all these buildings are or where they're located, so they quite frankly don't know enough to indicate a preference. What happens if housing becomes available in a building that has people on a wait list specific to that building? How would we determine who is offered that housing space between somebody who has been on the waiting list the longest versus somebody on the waiting list for that specific building from a more recent year?
So we're actually going to give the customers the option to opt in or opt out, but if they do opt in, then they will maintain their existing date time stamp from Housing Pad.
Okay, that helps, but that doesn't quite get to my question. If a space becomes available, and let's just call it Building X, and Building X either could have existed when they signed on or could be newer than when didn't exist when they signed on, and there's space in Building X, and there's a waiting list of people who have indicated a preference for Building X, and person who is the longest on the waiting list has no preference for Building X, who gets offered that space?
I would say that it would be the person on the list that's on that site-specific list, but when we transition, we're going to give everybody who's on the existing list the option. So I guess I'm just not quite clear.
Commissioner, I think it might help to clarify, we do have separate waiting lists now under the Housing Path system. So Housing Path is an integrated application portal, but once the applicants apply, they get placed on the list that they select. So if they check all, select all, they get put on, I think it's 21 separate lists. And then we do pull from those, according to the property of the program.
Okay, and let's say they don't select one of those, either now or earlier. My understanding is our policy is that the person who is longest on the waiting list is offered the space. So how will that happen when all buildings are waiting listed and not just the ones that have these special vouchers attached to them that are project-based
So
vouchers?
the goal is with this communication outreach to really try to touch everyone who is on our waiting list so that they can indicate one way or another what their preferences are. If they're interested in senior buildings, we're even exploring geographical preferences, if they're interested in all that apply, but that they're not able to hit next without indicating what their preferences are. We are also maintaining a dormant list for anyone who did not respond, and we will hold that list so that if someone does come back at a later stage who we weren't able to get in contact with, they'd still maintain their date and time in terms of whatever their preference is. However, the general concept here is you will have an opportunity, and there will be a designated period of time and enough time for people to get the communication, for us to do all of the reach outs. And we do this currently once a year. So this 37,000 is a reflection of that ongoing, at least once a year reach out. And in this new system, we are asking for you to give us some indication of what type of housing, location, and or properties you would be interested in being on the waiting list for. And we're thinking about how, when you do that refresh, making sure that once a year you're updating what your preferences are. And so everyone who therefore gets on, let's say it's the list for the Leggett, they're interested in the Leggett, they would be put in chronological order based on how long they've been on the waiting list.
And if there's someone who didn't make a preference
Right.
and has been on the waiting list longer, who gets offered that space?
And if they never made a preference and they never communicated back, and we've done all of the reach outs that we've done, the oldest person on the list, the oldest date and time person on the list gets the first offer for the first unit. When that individual who has not been responsive, communicated with, etc., resurfaces at some date and time, there'll be an evaluation of if they're the older.
It
But-
sounds to me like people are going to be forced to make a preference, that you can't be on the list without a preference. And that to me flies in the face of an integrated wait list that's based on
Your preference
time.
can be all, but yes, you will need to let us know.
That's
if
different
you-
than saying that's still a preference that you're forcing them to make versus somebody who doesn't make a preference.
Right, and the challenge with someone not making a preference, and what has really resulted in a challenge overall in terms of the ability to get our units and vacancy addressed and to get people where they want, is that reaching out to people who did not make a preference really becomes problematic, because they indicate, I wasn't even interested in that property. So you're spending there's extreme hundreds and hundreds of calls that happen to people who, if they had given us an indication, or if they had an opportunity to opt in or out, would give an indication of what their actual interest is.
That's great, and I understand wanting efficiency, but we can't sacrifice the policy and the preference of people who have been on the list longest for our efficiency. And we can't deem people dormant because they choose not to make a preference at the time they sign up. At least I don't feel that we can call people dormant because they don't exercise a preference option when they're refreshing each year or when we migrate over.
Yeah, I think one of our requirements, my recommendation would be that we have an individual indicate whatever their preference is, so that we're best able to determine how to allocate resources. If everyone never had to indicate if they want a voucher or if they want a unit, if they're interested in senior housing, if they're not, if we don't have those kind of options available, and if we're not able to operate in that manner, then we would be reaching out to 37,000 people every single time there's one unit available. And so there has to be a way in which we're able to really have an orderly response. And so the people who might not have given a preference previously will have an opportunity to do so with this outreach. And if their response is, I'm interested in whatever is available, then they'll be called whenever there is something available. So we're not limiting their options at all. We're just indicating, tell us what type of housing would be preferable for you.
So somebody who didn't make a preference and had been on the waiting list longest would be called first.
So everyone's going to get multiple reach outs during this process. So everyone will let us know. It will not be you made no preference. It will be you provided us with I want everything, or I only want a voucher, or I'm only interested in this type of housing, etc. And so that is where we will get the information that's currently not available that will allow us to understand how to direct resources.
If we take away the option to not have a preference, that's a change. And it's going to be a change that affects the prioritization of who gets housing, it sounds like, to me.
So if I
Which
can
would
just
be a
add,
policy
when
issue.
when Housing Path rolled out in 2015, we had a general wait list. We
That's
didn't
right.
have any site-based. We changed that. So we currently have 21 lists within the system. So we separated everything out. And so the voucher program has its own, PBV has its own project-based voucher, as well as we have some properties in there that are not just the site-based properties that we outlined within the presentation. We also have wait lists set up by program types. So we no longer have the general list now. But
How did that happen? When did that policy change? In the over 5 years I've been on the commission, we haven't voted to change the integrated nature of the waiting list.
It may have changed maybe in 2017. I would have to look into it and get the exact date for you. But we did make that change. And everyone who was on the general wait list, we put them on each list. So nobody lost their place. But it has created a lot of challenges when property managers are calling people up that they're not interested in that particular property. So that's an ongoing challenge for us. But no, we do not have just one wait list anymore.
That's interesting. That was different than my understanding. Maybe we could dig out the policy and send it to the commissioners so that we can all read it and take a look at that, because that's very different than my understanding of how we were functioning.
Is that also reflected in our admin plan, Darcel?
It's not going to speak to like the other properties, only the admin plan is going to reference for
The
HCV,
project-based.
only for
Right.
HCV, HRD program. So I'll look into it.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so a little more research on that would be helpful. Similarly, as a question, what if somebody would indicate that they're interested in housing in Silver Spring, but not a particular building, and the Leggett comes available, and people have said they're interested in the Leggett, who would be called first?
Date and time. So if you're interested in Silver Spring, then you get that preference, date and time.
And so the way it'll,
So that trumps the building wait list.
Right.
Geography trumps building?
We're still looking at how best to set it up, because geography would allow for you not to have to refresh and jump in every single time a new building is created. And so you'd automatically be added to that particular building waiting list if we follow a geography strategy that allows for people to indicate that they're interested in a certain zip code or a certain area. And so therefore, you would automatically be added to every waiting list for every property in that geography. So that's how you would be grouped. And the system does allow us to do that, but a part of the focus group sessions, a part of us figuring out what works best, what's easier for users in terms of what that experience would look like, is having a chance to get that feedback. But either way, it would be based on date and time and preference. And so we would not ever take someone from their date and time preference to trump someone else. If they were interested in that same geography, they should be added to that same property list. If that was the approach, if we go with a geography strategy. We haven't done that before. It's been property specific previously.
I believe we've had geographic preferences when,
Oh, we currently have geographical preferences?
Yes.
The customers, they're able to select which area, like in which area they want to, yes.
Oh, well, thank you.
okay. Well, that concerns me, and so I hope we can look into that further, and I'd like to see, the policy that disintegrated our integrated waiting list, and when the commission passes.
Kelleher, let me make sure I understand what concerns you have. The geographical concern is making sure that if someone selected that geographical area, that they're added to that waiting list for that property, that they're not overlooked for the waiting list for the Leggett, for example, because they've selected that location, and the way that we'd apply it would be therefore they're on that list. Does that solve whatever your concern would be, or is your concern something else?
My concern is that we, to my knowledge, had an integrated waiting list, and it was prioritized by date and time, and that would trump everything else, with the exception of the project-based ones where HUD requires that we have a separate waiting list. And quite frankly, I wasn't clear as to whether the preference for the building or date and time trumped if one, because I do believe from the one time we had our internal auditor looking into how the waiting list functioned, that there was the option to say you were interested in anything. I am uncomfortable if we are forcing people to express preferences that are going to impact their inclusion or not inclusion in terms of being offered housing over date and time. That makes me very, very uncomfortable, and I would need a lot more information unless we made a default that anybody who didn't respond with a preference was automatically opted into every single building, every single voucher program that they possibly qualified for, etc. I think that we grossly overassume the level of IT understanding that a lot of people have. I think we grossly overassume the understanding of various voucher programs in various buildings, et cetera, that people have of our organization. It's very easy to forget how much we know that the people applying for the services we manage don't know. And so I think we have to err on the side of honoring the person who doesn't feel comfortable making a preference as much as those who do feel comfortable making a preference. And I don't think our convenience is a reason to trump that.
Right.
And
my hope is that people will see if they have concerns or questions or get confused, that they will check all. That is the hope, but we will also look back to the default of check all. The check all will definitely be an option that could alleviate your concern in terms of someone not understanding the different programs or not having the capacity to go down and make those specific decisions as well.
If it were a default, I might feel better about it. Just having the option there, again, I think people are going to answer as little as possible to get out of the system, quite frankly, to finish. And so I would not feel comfortable assuming that only those that checked all were willing to consider anything. And I'm very concerned about people who signed up under a significantly different system, a significantly different regimen, and the understanding that it was an integrated waiting list where priority was dominated by time, suddenly finding out that even though they've been on the list the longest, they're not being offered opportunities that someone else is.
Well, and that's something that whenever that shift happened, I'm certain the communication around that included an update. And then also, as we indicated, there's an annual refresh. So people are going in, they're knowing what they're on the list for. And that happens now. So, and people walk in as well. You know, it's not just that we're only communicating electronically, but we will look at when that happened, how we communicated that out as well, and then also make sure that the commission is aware of what the refresh looks like in terms of the number of people that engage, have to go on, what they see, so that you can have an understanding of what their current experience is. Anything we do moving forward is to essentially make it easier for the customer. And so that's one of the things we're of course exploring.
Okay. The other comment I would like to make is the presentation refers to the use of robocalls as the first reach out. I think all of us are aware of the problem of robocalls and the new laws that are requiring phone systems, text systems, et cetera, to quite frankly screen out robocalls, and in some cases not allow the option to leave messages. And I am not comfortable with that being a first method of reach out to people, in terms of, I don't think they're going to get the calls. I don't think if they get them, they'll pay attention to them, because it'll say right on their ID, spam, blah, 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 blah. Or their text will be marked with a big red stop sign that says spam, do not open this unless you know who it's from.
We currently reach out to clients via text message and email through our current communication methodologies, Constant Contact and others. And so many of our clients have opted in to be able to be contacted that way. Also, the various properties, for example, we're rolling out Rent Cafe that will allow people to get communication. So there are certain applications and methods to communicate, and people can opt in or out if they're interested in receiving that communication. We're not going to use this outreach effort as the only way to reach out, but if there is a way to communicate with clients via text or email, and especially if that's their preference, just like you might indicate for your bank or for any other provider that you contact with. It could be your doctors, it could be Open Table, so many various type of businesses and entities are able to leverage that technology, especially once an individual has indicated that they would like to be contacted that way. And so it is an attempt to see if we're able to communicate and get in contact with certain clients that way. If they don't respond, then we are going to have an opportunity to do the calls and the reach outs. But we reach out, for example, the way that we got the high number of people at our technology event where we gave out laptops and worked with the county on the broadband initiative, was a blast text, blast calls, blast emails, and so that has definitely resulted in responses from clients. But I hear your concerns as well. It might be based on the way that we're wording it as a robo versus contacting, using our contact list to reach out. But we definitely want to try to reach our clients by all means possible. Yes.
And I just want to add on what Executive Director Andrews was saying, that the system is set up so that we can toggle many notifications. And it tells you what was successful, what wasn't, so that we can go down the list to contact you. So it keeps track of that too, that metadata, just so that you know. So we'll know what was successful, what wasn't per applicant, so that we can earmark what is successful for that particular person. It may be a call, it may be an email. So yes, we probably worded it wrong in the profile that we gave you, but we're going to be using a holistic approach in contacting our customers.
If somebody had indicated when they signed in that they were willing to accept texts, et cetera, then I can see that. But
Mhm.
robocall and phone call to me are not the same. And I think it would be important to be able to distinguish in your system that you're describing, whether it was a human person making a phone
Mhm.
call that came across as Housing Opportunity Commission versus a robocall that came across as spam,
Mm.
et cetera, on your caller ID, in terms of whether or not we have actually made a real attempt to get in touch with that person. So,
Well, if we
I-
don't get a response, for example, they don't opt in or opt out, then we're making a phone call. So it is not, it doesn't check off as first attempt if we get no response that way. The only way we'll know if we got a response from you is if you checked 1 or hit 2. If you don't give us either of those responses, then that means we did not get in touch with you, and now we are picking up the phone and calling you. And so that's the difference there. So we will have an indication of if that method was successful or not.
okay.
I would just add, for example, MCPS uses text messages extensively to communicate with parents in the system, including for, emergency alerts and other things. A number of other agencies, obviously, there's a lot of examples. And there is a way to have an automated system that is compliant with the anti-spam rules and does not get flagged, in particular by ensuring that you're only sending messages to people that have opted in and agreed to be contacted that way.
I think, again, if people say that they want to be contacted that way, that's great. I still worry about people who don't have a phone, who don't have a laptop. We saw during the pandemic, even though we've done a lot, and I applaud the efforts that this staff in particular made to get equipment to people, and with your training classes that you've had, I still think we have people that don't use electronic communications, and we have to be sure that we get in touch with them as well. And we have to offer them as much priority as their wait time would indicate they deserve in terms of getting housing.
Agreed.
Okay. Let's see. I think those are my questions at the moment. Pam, do you have any other questions or comments you'd like to add?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Okay. Then, if there's no other business, I would declare this meeting adjourned and look forward to further discussion with you on this.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.